There are some things you do not realize were normal until someone younger looks at you like you have lost your mind. Things you did every single day in the 1960s that would get you arrested, reported, or cancelled today. Not big historical events, but the small stuff, the everyday routines that shaped how Australians lived, what kids were allowed to do, and what was considered safe, legal, and acceptable. Today we are looking at 15 everyday things Australians did in the 60s that are gone forever, completely vanished and never coming back. Some of them will shock you.
Walk into any pub, milk bar or corner shop in the 1960s and you would see them. Cigarette vending machines. Shiny, chrome, standing there in plain sight. And here is the thing, kids could use them. No questions asked, no age checks, no lectures about lung cancer. You would walk up, shove in a few coins, pull the lever, and out would slide a pack of smokes. Sometimes you were buying them for your old man who had sent you down with the exact change. Sometimes you were buying them for yourself and nobody cared. Smoking was not dangerous yet, not officially. It was normal, glamorous even. Doctors smoked, teachers smoked, your pregnant auntie smoked. The telly was full of ads showing healthy, happy people lighting up, looking sophisticated, living their best lives. Everyone did it. Pubs were thick with smoke, restaurants, hospitals, aeroplanes, buses. The air was just grey, and kids grew up in it, breathing it in, thinking it was fine. It was not until the late 60s and into the 70s that the truth started coming out. Studies, warnings, campaigns. Slowly, smoking became shameful instead of cool, and those vending machines disappeared. Today, cigarettes are locked behind counters, covered in graphic warnings, taxed to hell, and illegal to sell to anyone under 18. The idea of a 9-year-old buying a pack from a machine sounds insane, but in the 60s it was Tuesday. Getting the cane at school. If you misbehaved in class, you got the cane. Simple as that. The teacher would pull it out, usually a thin strip of bamboo or rattan, tell you to hold out your hand and whack. Sharp, stinging, designed to hurt. Sometimes it was one hit, sometimes 3 or 4 depending on what you had done, and then you would go back to your desk, hand throbbing, trying not to cry in front of your mates. It was not considered abuse, it was discipline. Parents knew it happened and most of them supported it. If you came home with a red hand and told your mum you had been caned, she would probably give you another hiding for getting in trouble in the first place. Teachers had absolute authority. You did not talk back, you did not question, you copped it and you learned your lesson supposedly. The cane was used for everything, talking in class, not doing your homework, being cheeky to the teacher, running in the corridor. Sometimes kids got it for things that were not even their fault, just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was brutal, public humiliation combined with physical pain. And it was everywhere, primary schools, high schools, state schools, Catholic schools. By the 1980s, attitudes started changing. Parents began questioning whether hitting kids was actually effective discipline or just cruelty. Slowly, state by state, the cane was banned. The last state to abolish it was Queensland in 2006. These days, laying a hand on a student would end your career instantly. But in the 60s, it was standard practice. Pain as education. Riding in the back of a ute without seat belts. This one is hard to imagine now, but it was completely normal. Families would pile into the old Holden ute, kids in the tray, no seat belts, no restraints, no worries. You would sit on the wheel wells, hang onto the sides, feel the wind whipping your face as your old man tore down the highway. It was freedom. And it was incredibly dangerous, but nobody thought about that. Utes were not just for tradies. They were family vehicles. You would pack the kids in the back, throw in the dog, maybe a swag and an esky, and head out to the beach or the bush for the weekend. The kids would be laughing, yelling, standing up if the road was smooth enough. If the ute hit a bump, you would bounce a foot in the air and come crashing back down. If your old man took a corner too fast, you would slide across the tray and slam into your brother. And if he braked hard, you would go flying forward, grabbing onto anything to stop yourself from tumbling out. Accidents happened. Kids fell out. Some got hurt badly, some died. But it was not common enough to stop people from doing it. It was just accepted risk, part of life. By the 1970s, seatbelt laws started coming in. First for front seats, then eventually for everyone. Riding in the back of a ute became illegal. Today you would be pulled over, fined, maybe charged with child endangerment. But in the 60s, it was just a Saturday afternoon. Listening to the 6 o'clock swill. The 6 o'clock swill was an Australian institution and it was chaos. Up until 1966 in New South Wales and later in other states, pubs had to close at 6 in the evening. The idea came from World War I, meant to stop workers spending all their wages on grog and getting home drunk. But by the 60s, it had created a culture of binge drinking that was wild, dangerous, and unforgettable. Blokes would knock off work at 5, race to the pub, and drink as much as they could before the doors shut at 6. It was called the swill because that is what it was, shoving down as many schooners as possible in an hour. The pubs were packed, standing room only, bodies pressed together, beer slopping everywhere. The floors were covered in sawdust to soak up the spills. Blokes would order multiple beers at once, line them up on the bar and scull them one after another. There was no sitting, no relaxing, no conversation. It was just drinking, fast and hard. By 6, the pubs would empty, and the streets would be full of drunk men stumbling home. Fights broke out, accidents happened, wives waited, furious, knowing their husbands were about to walk through the door half-cut, smelling like stale beer and cigarettes. It was toxic, dysfunctional, and everyone knew it. In 1966, New South Wales finally relaxed the laws, allowing pubs to stay open until 10. The swill ended, and pub culture slowly changed. Today, pubs are places where you can have a quiet drink, a meal, a conversation. But for decades, the 6 o'clock swill defined Australian drinking culture, and it left a mark. Sending kids to the shop with a handwritten note was normal. If your mum needed something from the shop, she'd send you, and I mean you, by yourself, at 6 or 7 years old. She'd scribble a quick note on a scrap of paper, something like 1 loaf of bread, 1 pint of milk, a packet of smokes, and hand it to you with a few coins. Off you'd go, walking down the street, note in hand, trusted to bring back the right items and the correct change. The shopkeeper would read the note, recognise your mum's handwriting, and fill the order. Sometimes they'd add something extra, a lolly or a biscuit, just because they knew you. And if your mum didn't have enough money, the shopkeeper would let her run a tab until payday. It was built on trust, on knowing your neighbours, on community connection. Kids walked to the shop alone all the time. There was no fear, no paranoia about strangers. You knew the route, you knew the shopkeeper, and your mum knew you'd be fine. You'd hand over the note, wait while they gathered everything, pay and walk home. Simple. And you felt important, responsible, trusted with grown-up tasks. Today, sending a young child to the shop alone would get you reported to child services. We've become terrified of letting kids out of our sight, convinced that danger lurks on every corner. Maybe we're safer now, or maybe we're just more fearful. Either way, that trust, that independence, that sense of kids being capable and responsible is gone. The handwritten note, the solo walk to the shop, the community that made it possible, vanished. Watching the test pattern and waiting for television to start. Television was not always on. Hard to believe now, but in the 1960s, TV stations actually shut down at night. Programming would end, usually around midnight, and the screen would cut to the test pattern. A still image, geometric shapes, maybe a high-pitched tone. That was it. No late-night movies, no infomercials, no 24-hour news, just the test pattern sitting there, waiting. If you woke up in the middle of the night and turned on the television, that is what you would see. And in the morning, you would sit there, waiting for the broadcast to start again. There was something almost ritualistic about it. You would turn on the television, see the test pattern, and know you were too early. So you would wait, maybe eat your breakfast,
and eventually the picture would flicker to life. The station logo would appear, the national anthem would play, and then the day's programming would begin. There was no impatience, no flicking between channels because there weren't many channels. You had ABC and eventually a couple of commercial stations. That was it. The test pattern became part of the cultural memory. Kids stared at it, hypnotized by the shapes. Adults learned to time their mornings around it. It was a reminder that television was a limited resource, something you had to wait for, something that existed on a schedule, not on demand. By the 1980s, as channels expanded and stations started running longer hours, the test pattern disappeared. Now, television never stops. It is always on, always available, always begging for your attention. But something was lost. That quiet, patient waiting, that sense that not everything needed to be instant, is gone. Having the dunny man collect your toilet waste was a normal part of life. Before sewerage systems reached every suburb, most Australian homes had an outdoor dunny, a toilet at the back of the yard, usually a wooden shed with a can underneath. Once a week, the dunny man came to collect it. You would hear him in the early morning, the rattle of the truck, the clang of metal cans, and you would know he was on your street. He would walk up the back lane, open the little hatch at the rear of the dunny, pull out the full can, replace it with an empty one, and move on to the next house. It was hard, dirty, undignified work, and it was absolutely essential. The dunny man was part of the community, but nobody wanted his job. The smell alone was unbearable. In summer, it was worse, with flies everywhere and the stench thick in the heat. Families tried to use the dunny as little as possible, especially just before collection day, but sometimes you had no choice. Kids were terrified of falling in. There were stories, probably exaggerated, about kids who dropped things down there and had to fish them out. The dunny man's job started disappearing as suburbs got connected to sewerage systems. By the 1970s, most urban homes had indoor plumbing, and the dunny man became a relic. But people who grew up with the outdoor dunny remember it vividly. The cold seat in winter, the spiders, the smell, the weekly visit from the bloke who did the job nobody else wanted. It was not glamorous, it was not pleasant, but it was real, and it was part of life. Now, indoor plumbing is so universal, we do not even think about it. For decades, however, the dunny man was a fixture of Australian life, and his work kept the suburbs functioning. Buying loose lollies by the ounce. The corner shop had a wall of glass jars filled with loose lollies, gobstoppers, musk sticks, chocolate freckles, licorice straps, jelly babies, aniseed rings. You would walk in with a few coins, point at the jars you wanted, and the shopkeeper would scoop them into a white paper bag, weigh them, and tell you the price. Everything was sold by the ounce. Threepence worth of mixed lollies could keep you happy for days. You would ration them, make them last, or more likely, scoff the lot on the walk home. There was no packaging, no use-by dates, no nutrition labels, just lollies in jars, priced by weight. The shopkeeper usually threw in an extra couple if they liked you. Kids spent hours deciding what to get, noses pressed against the glass, trying to maximize their haul. It was a beautiful system. No waste, no plastic, no overpriced pre-packaged nonsense. You bought what you wanted, exactly how much you wanted. If you only had a penny, you got a penny's worth. If you had saved up, you could fill a whole bag. By the 1980s, pre-packaged lollies took over. Supermarkets wanted standardization, branding, barcodes. The glass jars disappeared, the corner shops closed. And with them went that personal touch, that moment of decision, that transaction between a kid and a shopkeeper who knew their name. Now lollies come in plastic bags, wrapped in layers of packaging, designed for shelf life and convenience. You cannot buy just a few, you buy the whole bag or nothing. It is efficient, sure. But we lost something. The ritual, the choice, the simplicity of a few coins and a paper bag full of sweetness. Using telephone party lines. If you had a telephone in the 1960s, you were lucky. But there was a catch. You might be on a party line. This meant you shared your phone line with another household, sometimes two or three. When your phone rang, their phone rang too.
And if they picked up first, you would hear their conversation. You would lift the receiver and there would be voices, your neighbor chatting away, and you would have to hang up and wait your turn. Privacy did not exist. If you needed to make a call, you would pick up, and if the line was busy, you just had to wait. Sometimes you would eavesdrop, just listening to someone else's conversation. Sometimes they would eavesdrop on you. It was awkward, frustrating, invasive, but it was cheap. Private lines cost more, and not everyone could afford them. So party lines became the norm in rural areas and even some suburbs. You would develop a kind of telephone etiquette. If you heard someone talking, you would quietly hang up and try again later. But some people did not care. They would interrupt, demand their turn, start arguments. There were feuds over phone usage, neighbors who hated each other because one family hogged the line. By the 1970s, as infrastructure improved, party lines started disappearing. Everyone got their own private line, and suddenly, phone calls became personal again. Today, we carry phones in our pockets, make calls whenever we want, and text instead of talking. The idea of sharing a line with strangers sounds insane. But for years, that was reality. The party line, a shared connection, awkward and intrusive, but somehow it worked. Getting your shoes fitted with an X-ray machine. This one sounds like science fiction, but it happened. Walk into a shoe shop in the 1950s and 1960s, and they had a machine called a fluoroscope. You would put your feet inside, press a button, and look through a viewer at the top. Inside, you could see an X-ray image of your feet, bones glowing green, showing exactly how your toes fit inside the shoe. It was supposed to ensure a perfect fit. Kids loved it. You could see your skeleton right there, wiggling your toes and watching the bones move. It felt futuristic and magical. Shop assistants used it constantly, multiple times a day, sticking their hands in to adjust shoes, getting blasted with radiation over and over. Nobody knew how dangerous it was. X-rays deliver radiation. Repeated exposure causes cancer, burns, and long-term health problems. But in the 1960s, radiation was not understood the way it is now. These machines were everywhere, unregulated, pumping out doses of radiation to kids' feet, shop workers' hands, anyone standing nearby. By the 1970s, the health risks became clear. Governments started banning the machines. Shoe shops pulled them out, and suddenly shoe fitting went back to the old method, pressing your thumb against the front of the shoe and asking if it felt tight. The fluoroscope became a relic, a cautionary tale about technology we adopted without understanding. People who used them as kids are fine, mostly. But some shop workers developed health problems years later, radiation exposure catching up with them. Today, getting an X-ray requires lead aprons, trained technicians, and strict safety protocols. But for a while, we were zapping kids' feet at the shoe shop, thinking it was progress. Mending and darning everything instead of replacing it. Nothing was disposable in the 1960s. If something broke, you fixed it. If your socks got holes, your mum darned them. If your shirt tore, she mended it. If your shoes wore out, you took them to the cobbler for new soles. Throwing things away was not an option because things were not cheap. You made do, you repaired, you stretched every item until it literally could not be used anymore. And even then, it became something else. Old clothes became rags, quilts, stuffing for cushions. Mums spent hours darning socks, sitting by the wireless needle and thread in hand, weaving new material over the holes. It was a skill passed down through generations, essential for keeping a family clothed on a tight budget. Men would resole their own shoes if they had the tools. Kids wore hand-me-downs until they fell apart, then those got patched and passed to the next kid. Nothing went to waste. Today, we throw things out without thinking. Socks get holes, chuck them. Shirt tears, buy a new one. Shoes wear out, bin them. We live in a disposable culture where replacing is easier and often cheaper than repairing. But we have lost something. The skill, the resourcefulness, the respect for the things we own. In the 1960s, Australians knew how to make things last because they had to. Mending was not a hobby or a trendy, sustainable choice. It was survival. And there was dignity in it, in taking care of what you had, in making do. Now, we have more stuff than ever, but we value it less. The art of darning, the patience of mending, the pride in making things last. gone. Saturday mornings belonged to kids. You would wake up, scarf down some breakfast, and head to the local cinema for the matinee. Just you, maybe a mate, no parents. You would be 7 or 8 years old, walking through the streets alone, a few coins in your pocket, ready for a morning of cartoons, cereals, and a main feature. The cinema was chaos. Hundreds of kids yelling, laughing, throwing things. Adults dropped you off and would pick you up hours later. In between, you were free. The matinee always followed the same pattern. First a newsreel or a short film, then cartoons, usually Looney Tunes or Disney, then a serial, a cliffhanger that kept you coming back every week, and finally the main feature, usually a western or an adventure film. The cinema was loud, sticky, full of spilled cordial and popcorn. Kids ran up and down the aisles, threw Jaffas down the sloped floor to see them roll, talked through the whole thing. The ushers tried to keep order, but it was hopeless. Nobody cared. It was about the experience, the freedom, the ritual of Saturday mornings at the pictures. Parents trusted the system. You would be gone for hours, but they knew you were safe, packed into a cinema with 100 other kids. Today, a 7-year-old going to the movies alone would cause panic. Parents would be arrested. But in the 60s, it was normal. Kids had independence, space, trust. The Saturday matinee was ours, a pocket of childhood autonomy that has vanished completely. Now kids are supervised, constantly scheduled, monitored, safer maybe, but something has been lost. Buying meat wrapped in butcher paper with no use-by date. The local butcher was a man you trusted. You'd walk into his shop, smell the sawdust and raw meat and order what you needed. A pound of mince, some lamb chops, a bit of stewing steak. He'd cut it fresh, wrap it in brown butcher paper, tie it with string and hand it over. No plastic trays, no cling film, no use-by dates stamped on labels. Just meat, paper and trust. You'd take it home, unwrap it, cook it that day or the next. You could smell if it was off, see if it looked wrong. There were no guidelines, no food safety regulations telling you when to throw it out. You used your judgment, your senses. The butcher knew your family. He'd remember what you usually ordered, recommend cuts based on what you were cooking, slip the kids a bit of fritz. It was personal. Today, meat comes in plastic trays, wrapped tight, labelled with use-by dates. It's safer, regulated, standardised. But it's also impersonal. You don't know the butcher. You don't know where the meat came from. You just trust the label, the system. The butcher in his blood-stained apron, wrapping your order in paper, knowing your name, that's gone. Listening for the telegraph boy's knock. Before telephones were common, urgent messages came by telegraph. You would write your message, take it to the post office, pay per word, and they would transmit it across the country. At the other end, a telegraph boy would deliver it to the recipient's door. These were for urgent news. If you heard a knock and opened the door to see a young bloke in uniform holding a telegram, your heart would sink. Telegrams were expensive, so people only used them for urgent news. And urgent news was usually bad news. Someone had died. There had been an accident. A son was missing in action. Families dreaded the telegraph boy. During the wars, his arrival meant the worst. He would knock, hand over the small yellow envelope and leave. The family would stand there staring at it, terrified to open it. Sometimes telegrams announced births, weddings, or good news, but the association stuck. The telegraph boy became a symbol of dread. By the 1970s, as telephones became more common, telegrams faded. The last telegram in Australia was sent in 1993. Today, urgent messages come as texts and emails, instant and impersonal. But the telegraph, with its weight and its formality, is gone. And so is the telegraph boy, the messenger who brought news that changed lives.